Brent has a lot of experience. Grew up in the South. Probably the most important thing to know about him is he is an NC State graduate. So we love that about Brent. He's had a great career out in the industry after he left NC State with his Ph.D. He worked for 17 years with Christensen Farms in Minnesota and had a lot of different roles and responsibilities, including all facets of the production, nutrition, research, analytics, and things that were involved there. About 2 years ago, probably close to the day, Brent joined Cargill, and he currently serves as the Monogastric Innovation Lead for North America. And so Brent's been kind of working on this kind of an area for a long part of his career, and we're very fortunate to have him this afternoon to share his thoughts and observations. So Brent?
Thank you, Dr. C. and the committee for having me back here in North Carolina. My wife and I really enjoyed it during the time that we spent here for my PhD with Eric Van Houten. And so thank you for having me back. So I know it's right after lunch. And so I'd ask everybody just to stand where you are. No, we're not going to do any exercising. So just a quick poll. I'm not going to call anybody out, so feel free to answer this the way that you would like to. So everyone that believes that they're innovative, remain standing. Everyone else, sit down. So if you are innovative, if you believe you're innovative, keep standing. If not, please sit down. And I don't have individuals online here, but it looks like I'd say 40 to 50% of the people are still standing. That's great. So congratulations. We'll go into a little bit of depth here. You can go ahead and have a seat, but always like to know the audience a little bit before getting started. So all of you may even be further ahead of me or what we're going to talk about here. But I wanted to provide a little bit more about myself. I think it's important to know where the individual is coming from. Dr. C gave a great introduction of that. I am a trained nutritionist. I love complex puzzles, and I like putting things together. So today we're going to talk about a lot of broad things that are interconnected and innovations both from the past and the future. It's not going to be just nutrition. It's going to be pretty much all pig production. The picture that you see with all the sows lined up, that's my dad and I feeding pigs back home in Georgia. So that's how we raised them. That's where I came from. That's really where I found my love for the pig. Wanted to go to Texas A&M, thought I wanted to do beef cattle nutrition. Pigs were still in my blood. So I followed back up to Iowa State and then over to North Carolina State. Pretty much followed the pigs. I do want to give a shout out to Eric, allowing me to do really what I like to do and put in those things together, genetic by nutrition interactions. Even though we didn't have a meat lab here at NC State, him and Dr. C and others worked to provide me that opportunity. So greatly appreciate that. Showed all kinds of different livestock. The other picture there that you'll see me looking in a microscope with really shaggy long hair and a University of Georgia hat. That was actually looking into embryo transfer. And so looking into that embryo that was flushed out of a limousine before it was going to be implanted into a dairy cattle. I'd say so from a young age, really understood or appreciated the science and what is possible going forward. And then Christensen Farms, I love my time there. I was looking to change a little bit in my life and really focus on innovation full-time for sure. One of the things that Bob used to do, Bob Christensen was the founder and CEO of that farm. That when I started, Dr. C told me, he says he needs to grow or he's not going to be in business. Well, that was back when he had 90,000 sows, grew to 145,000, and then got into Seaboard Triumph Foods and progress that. But one of the things that Bob did, and I loved it to this day, is at 5 o'clock on a Friday, he would come in with 2 beers, set it down on my desk, pop one open, and just talk pigs. And so that's how I kind of like to talk about this is we're going to talk pigs here and a little bit about the past and think about the future as we go forward. So a little bit about what I'm going to cover today. There are quite a few topics. I'm going to hit on a few of those. So technology investments of the industry and ag tech in general, innovation mindset, what it takes to be innovative so that we can all remain standing in the future. Areas of future and current innovation. So I'll touch on those. I know John's going to go a little bit more into detail on some of those, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. Stay at a pretty high level. Look at digital farming, what that truly means, at least from my perspective, and some of the things that we're working on, and then advancements to precision pig farming. And I think we've got a job ahead of us. I think everyone involved in the pork or protein sector does have a very noble purpose, and that's feeding the world, essentially. So as we look by 2050, somewhere around 9 to 10 billion people, how do we feed those with very tasty and high protein diet? 70% of the global food demand increase over that time period. And then we've definitely got pressures on us from several different areas, including climate change, environment, those types of things. So how can we all be more efficient and improve the world that we live in? This is some information that shows where dollars are spent or investments are spent across there to the left, across the different industries that are there. And so green would be a lot of investment. So media, professional service, finance, and insurance. There towards the bottom, the bottom 3 would be hospitality, construction, agriculture, and hunting. So I would say that that's a very broad statement. I think you heard from the individual here at lunch that we definitely have tractors that can do a lot. I'll talk about a planter that's pulled by the tractor that can do a lot. However, that one asset goes over a lot of acres, right? And so how do we in the pig sector that have a lot of barns utilize technology in a way and apply that in a way that it's economical and profitable for the future? So in the past 5 years, there's been 360 new startups, and this is all the way to 2018. In 2012, there was 1.8 billion. In 2015, 4.5 billion. In 2018, 8 billion. And the dollars today, it's tough with what COVID happened, and but that number continues to increase today. A number I saw for 2020 would say in the agriculture and food sector, that's closer to $30 billion. So as you can imagine, dollars are being invested within agriculture and within ag tech. I think it's up to us and commend North Carolina State at being one of those leaders where to invest and how to invest. So it's one, more efficient and profitable for our industry and better for our industry going forward. So getting back to another question, and this is by show of hands this time. You don't have to stand up. Again, I'm not going to call anyone out, so feel free to answer as you like. But how many of you would pay $500 per year if you never had to mow your grass again? And this would be around your house. 400. So that's a very small percentage for those on the call here or on the virtual. I would say maybe 5 to 10%. So a little bit surprising. So perhaps that's because you like to get out and do that. It doesn't seem a task. It's more you can think about it. I'm sure there's several different reasons that you approach that. Openly, I thought that answer might be quite differently. I did this back about 5 years ago with our leadership team. And I had them write rather than say $400, what would you pay so that you never had to mow your lawn again? And I got anywhere from zero, much as what I heard here today, or representative of here today, all the way up till priceless. But I would say at least 50% of that team would have invested in something so that they didn't have to mow the lawn again. So I guess for the 5% or 10% that were here, and maybe for acknowledgement to the other 90%, 80 to 90%, is there is technology to do that today. These are mowers that I took a picture of when I was over in Europe. I went over and learned about this about 6 years ago, went back 3 years ago, and these have really populated the countryside compared to what I thought in the future. And so this is essentially like a Roomba, but works much better than a Roomba. And it does cut the grass as we go through here. And so I was surprised to see that even John Deere is making one. So it appeals to a larger group. So interesting what is out there. So that's your home. Maybe to go off the speaker representative here at lunch that talked about the tractor that's used and how much technology goes into that. This would be a planter, and this was at Beck's Hybrid. I toured there about 3 years ago, and this was a planter that adjusted based on the soil type and area of a particular field, and it would determine one of two hybrids to be planted. It would determine the width of one of three widths, 10, 20, and 30 inches, and then the population rate at which those were planted. And so I thought it was pretty important, one, that this was going on, two, providing the research to answer the question, what's the value if we did things more precisely? What's the value? What's the yield compared to a normal situation? And so this was one that I think, looking at other industries for innovations and other areas completely outside of agriculture, although this one hits closer to home, I think adapting technology out there is just as important as coming up with the technology for ourselves. So this was interesting. So this is in the research phase at this point, really answering the question from normal application and making one decision for the field versus several across that field. How much value is that? At lunch, Mark and I had a discussion about gestation feeding and knowing the individual difference there in gestation. Is feeding that more precisely? How much value is that? I think that's one thing that we need to answer as a industry. I think also, what is the value of putting in an extra feed line to be more precise? I think some of those questions are left to be answered to justify the chicken or the egg. Do I make the expense up front, and is it worth the complexity? So I think this is an example of doing that in another area. So that's talking about other industries. When we think about pig production in general, what comes to mind when you think about past innovations? So just think a little bit. If somebody wants to say what comes to mind when you think about innovations, and it could be in any area of pig production. What are the biggest innovations that come to mind from the past? Concrete. Indoor housing. Good one. Any others offered up? I've got a list of my own, but I was curious what the crowd thought here.
Multiple site production.
Multiple site production. Great.
Weekly farrow.
Absolutely. Yep. Great. Good. All good and all right for sure. So when I think about the future, I think about what successes have there been in the past. And as you think through that, there are quite a few that really stand out over the years. And to think that these started in a place that there was probably a lot of objection at times. Is it worth the hassle? Is it not? Is it worth the cost or not? But a lot of these have either been implemented and stayed, or they might have been implemented for a period of time and then were removed for various different reasons. But artificial insemination is probably one that comes to top of mind for me. Being able to spread that genetic expression from one boar onto multiple is just amazing to me. And to think how far that we're able to spread that with PCAI, even to reduce the number of sperm that are required to inseminate those animals, I think is pretty cool. And I put an AI up here on first and then thought to myself, well, somebody might think about that as artificial intelligence that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But I think there are both AIs are important or will be important in the future. 3-site production, of course, medicated or segregated early wean to finish. I know there's a lot of distinction about whether people prefer or like wean to finish versus true nursery, but it does provide an option, and especially for the Midwest, creates a lot of flexibility there. One on the feed side or the nutrition side, phytase is one that the first really enzyme that really took hold and is pretty much ubiquitous across there. I would say in the Midwest, that was the first paper that I had to write for our producers there at CF, is they were disappointed or not happy with me in that we implemented phytase. Well, you know, that team wanted the phosphorus and had the land to be able to, and they wanted the phosphorus that came from there rather than to buy fertilizer. That may be quite a bit different here, but other enzymes are becoming more accepted. Xylanase would be another one that maybe not for the feed efficiency response or for reduction in mortality, and so ultimately affecting utilization of feed as well. So that's another one. Sort barns. This was one that truly is, and the more that we talk about labor and handling and marketing pigs properly, this is one that new individuals coming into the industry ask about. And it's kind of like we've got a lot of those scales in barns that are not housing pigs right now, right? They're in a machine shed that were tried, didn't work at the time for that condition. But now how do those fit going forward? So as we talk about leveraging the labor across more animals, those size of farms continue. Ractopamine is another one that is a technology that worked pretty much every time if it was implemented well, provided efficiency and growth. Vaccines would be another one. Some of those out of necessity, but some of them out of really improvements in being able to do that. And so many of those are now, did we apply it right, whether then did it work or not? Fat hardness technologies. CLA was an example of one that was a changer, but not really adopted from a high rate because of its cost. And I think that's profitability is important as we think through that. Lipinate was one that really did hit both the effect of hardening that carcass, allowing us to use more distillers over time. Also work from a cost perspective that we could enable that cost savings there and utilize that. Immunocastration is yet another one. And I'm not going to get into any political discussions or any political statements. This is more of just stating, having statements. Is that from a technological standpoint it is an innovation. Whether it can be applied routinely from a labor standpoint and whether it's worth going through there, and ultimately whether the customers or consumers will accept that going forward, I think we've got to acknowledge that. Nevertheless, it is a technology and it is an innovation. So what do you think about if I said, hey, I've got this idea of a rotary breeding area for sows? So think about that for a moment. A rotary breeding cell. So you've seen this in dairies, rotary dairies, where the individual stays there and milks the cow, I should say, not the sow. Maybe that's another business to be in, but milks the cow, right? What if that was from a sow perspective? Okay, so I'm not going to ask for any specific answers, but by raising your hand, what was your first thought positive? Raise your hand if your first thought was positive, that it can work. Okay, I'm seeing about maybe 5% of the team. Well, this was actually proposed to me by an individual that I worked with that I respected quite well. And I'm one that expresses what I think on my face, sometimes to my benefit, sometimes to my detriment. But he said to me, and I appreciate what he said. His name's Doran Dahl. He was a software engineer at Christensen Farms. He goes, before you give me anything negative or say anything negative about it, give me 5 reasons it would be beneficial. And so for me, that was a mind switch, right? Do I think my first thought, I'll admit, was negative. I will admit at that point, based on everything that we were talking about. But I think this is when we ask people to come in our industry and help us with solutions or solving problems that maybe we haven't been able to in the for the future. I think we have to be open enough to take some of those in. And it might be 5, 10, 100 ideas that an individual might have, but that chance of finding that 1 or 2 that's really going to stick, I think, is important. And how we interact with people going forward, I think, is extremely important. So allowing the outside in, outlining what success looks like. We all know those areas of our businesses, our industry that we want there. Allow for freedom of observation. Here's what I think is important. What are you seeing as you go through the operations? What do you think can help through there? And then just prioritize. It's much easier to prioritize a long list than down and not be able to fully leverage other ideas that they might have that might not just have been the first one. So as I think about pork production, I think about labor a lot. I think about as I travel in different countries, there always seems to be an immigrant population that's doing the jobs that are very important to our business, but yet some of the most demanding physical labor that there is. So I think we definitely need to work on some things that improve labor going forward. I think, if you think about some of those areas that are most important that if could be automated would be really nice. Automated power washing, and there's several examples that are in the market today. A better way to vaccinate, whether that's semi-automated, automated, or a different way completely, and then automated animal movement. I think those are for me, those are 3 of the big ones. There's some other things, ease of farrowing or what it takes to work within the farrowing house and what that is. Estrus detection, there's some that are really good at that. There's some technologies that can help with that, but those are kind of some of the big areas that I see. And I think we got to think about those as what are we willing to spend or invest? And so as you look at the top right there, really that's a precision of cleaning relative to difficulty and potential issues. And as you can see, those are linearly related. Maybe not perfectly. I didn't do any regressions on this to get to R squared or anything, but the one on the bottom left, so the lowest cost of entry and perhaps the least trained, you might say, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 grand. The one in the middle is closer to 20 to 30 grand, and the one to the far right is 70 grand, $70,000 for one. But that one works is you pretty much wash it once and it'll repeat exactly what you did. If you did a horrible job of washing, it'll do a horrible job of washing. If you did a great efficient job, it'll do a great efficient job. So those technologies are out there today. And is it willing for anyone to invest in those or not? Definitely, you got to decide where you want to be on that spectrum for sure. And not everyone's at the same place, I would say. The other thing that I'd say on this relative to any of these, whether it's vaccination, power washing, or animal movement, I think we got to be thinking about the farms that we do build into the future. We may not be in a high growth cycle, but eventually those barns are going to need to be replaced at some point. We got to think about how those are designed. So do we want some of this technology to fit into it, and really thinking about those and really thinking about the barn of tomorrow. I talked a little bit about my Ph.D. program, and Eric allowed me to do this, was genetics by nutrition. I think there's a lot to be learned and worked upon with genetics, health, environment, and nutrition for sure. I think the geneticists have done a great job of providing us animals that are very efficient and pretty much what we asked for: more pigs, more efficient pigs. There's definitely not all positives that come with that change, but we got what we asked for in many situations. And so now I think it's that looking at the total profitability and really putting emphasis on there from a selection standpoint. But that technology from that area has endless possibilities. And I'll share one of those that's pretty important to me going forward as I think into the future. Healthy animals makes everybody look good, especially the nutritionist and the veterinarian, and makes it easier for our staff to do things as well. So I think that's definitely work together, but knowing that health is a challenge going through here is how can nutrition and health interplay with the genetics and that. Two things that I'll share on my experiences and observations of genetic by nutrition interactions, and it goes to a question that was posed this morning: should we slow those gilts down or not? I would say that I was aware of a study in which 5 different maternal lines were fed much like a finishing pig to be able to get the terminal value of each one of those maternal genetics. And I would say that there was one of those 5 that had significant bone and or ligament challenges or issues. And so even though each one of those were in the same barn, they came from the same sow farm, everything was the same, there definitely was an interaction there. The other one is looking at some boars that were being produced side by side within the same room. There were some that were extremely loose or had diarrhea, and others that were not adjusting and fed the same diet, right? And so feeding those different ones fiber changed that outcome significantly. So I think as we go forward and we think about these innovations and knowledge gaps, I think these are definitely ones that we need to understand that we might not be able to solve everything by one thing, that it might take a combination of many. Probably one of the biggest innovations that I see from a genetic standpoint are disease-resistant pigs. Again, not going to get into any political discussion, but if we look at the cost to the U.S. industry, it's somewhere between $700 and $800 million per year. I think that's an opportunity. If our customer and our consumer will accept that, I think that's important for us to know. I would say over time that public perception is changing. The other thing that I'd say is we have to acknowledge what the general public knows about this technology or what that is. So CRISPR technology, right? So if we think about what the public sees, Rampage was a movie that I was watching as I was learning about this particular genetics, and that was a CRISPR technology used to change a large gorilla and a wolf, and it had The Rock in it, so that's kind of why I watched it with my kids. But that's their exposure, right? This huge, larger than this room gorilla, because of CRISPR technology. So that education, that knowledge about what it means, how it's being used, that it can naturally occur in nature, but how to get that. So one would be a regulatory standpoint, whether it's the FDA or USDA, to be able to approve that, but then also educate those consumers and the public as well. So from an awareness standpoint, where it sits at right now, about 30% of the public are aware of this technology out there. 41% are comfortable eating pork from an animal that was produced in this manner, and 80% were either neutral or would eat this animal. And so really we're talking potentially about 20% that would have objections to this. I guess the question is how vocal will that 20% be, and how vocal will we be at it telling that discussion? So, but that really changes things, right? If we didn't have to worry about PRRS and or other diseases, that really changes the efficiency and sustainability of our business relatively quickly. So when I think about precision, so switching subjects a little bit and get into the feeding, when I think about precision feeding, this is what I think about is how we do everything today more precisely, whether that's analyze our ingredients better, formulate our diets more precisely so that what we believe is being manufactured in our feed mills are actually being manufactured, that we are predicting the performance of that animal properly, and that information is going back into how we run our business every day. So I don't think we can forget about the importance of our day-to-day life and how much more precise or accurate that we can get there as these other technologies are adding to this cycle. Sustainability, I talked about that a little bit. I think, so John Patience and I had some discussion on this. He's really passionate about this topic and really calling out. I know we talked about water a little bit earlier today, but carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Phosphorus, I think we've got probably the best knowledge on. Nitrogen, we know pretty well, but are we measured in quite the right way? And then carbon, I think there's quite a bit to learn there, but there is a way going forward that we could utilize that on our formulation system and modeling system to predict the effect that is there. Now, how we choose to weight that in terms of profitability or not, at least we would be able to predict the effect of what's coming out of the pig. And then ultimately what we saw this morning is going to make it into the environment or be back into the crops that we have. So I think that's important to really tie all those pieces together as we go forward. At the same time, we talk about those. We've definitely got some Zero Zinc summits happening soon. That's the European to use less zinc as we go forward. So I think those things will continue to come at us, and we need to be prepared and ready for those as those do reach us. Enzymes, I'm pretty bullish on enzymes. I think that if we can utilize more of the ingredients or nutrients that we're already feeding the pig and release some of that value, I think is important. As I'm learning more and more about this enzyme area and the technology that they're using within this area, you know, there's libraries of 4,000 enzymes with 130,000 strains, and they're using digital modeling of these compounds and these proteins essentially determine or predict how those are going to function inside the pig. And so it's pretty mind-blowing, some of the technology that they're using. Ultimately, we'll need to run that through a pig, but to look at stability and activity together, to look at a hybrid, essentially enzyme, it's pretty cool. So we've done that within corn, we've done that within pigs, and now looking at enzymes to do those same things while you're using machine learning to run through rapid scenarios of all those interactions that could occur. So pretty cool work that's being done in that area. Where does that tie back to our business? I think it's interesting for individuals that haven't been in the pork industry. They come into the pork industry, and one of the overwhelming things that I hear is, man, it's a lot more complex than I thought. And they're right. There's a lot of factors that go into that. At the end of the day, being efficient and hitting profitability goals is pretty important to keep our areas in business. And so this is one thing that I think about, or a picture of what I think about when I think about connecting things together. And I'm not sure that slide showed up exactly like I wanted it to, but I think you get the picture here of the connection between the feed mill, the site or sites that are out there, the system data, that not just that one site might be an outlier, but how that interrelates, and pork processing, where we get data on almost every single pig that is processed there, and how to merge and utilize that data. We talk about big data all the time, but how we utilize that data to make better, faster decisions is pretty important there. One thing that may not be talked about on the, and I think about what are we missing, right? We've got a lot of environmental controls. We've got a lot of formulation and some of those things that were talked about is the pig weight cameras, but also feed inventory. So how much feed am I using? There's a lot more technology out there today than there was even 5 years ago, using essentially what you see there. Machine vision to actually see how that feed is flowing over time and to predict that. But as we talk about turning nutrients into pork, it's pretty important that we know our use on a more timely and real-time basis, and whether we're wasting that feed or not, or is that converting to pork with the cameras. I think that's a huge next step for us, even though those things have been really worked on for the last 10 to 15 years. This would be another one. This would be NIR, inline NIR. So NIR is used for feed ingredients for sure, but looking at this, it could occur in several different places. This one is as it's going into the mixer, the ability to change how much corn, soy, and others, having the ability to do that every 15 seconds is pretty cool. Again, the question is how much value does that bring to your facility or organization? Really depends on how much variation that you've got coming in. So it's one of those, it depends. But I think this is one of those technologies that will become more and more apparent as we go forward. So when we talk about precision agriculture, I think of the different areas. I think of poultry, pigs, and dairy cattle. And this really looks at individual surveillance versus group. And I feel like pigs or pork is somewhat in the middle of that. And that from a dairy cattle standpoint, or even egg layers, you might say, have sources that you have measurements pretty much every day. Some of the things that I talked about, once those are implemented, we'll have better measures, but we don't have a lot of better measures until about 4 to 6 months after we've done our work and don't have that chance to potentially change going forward or within the term. Where I think from the poultry sector, you're really looking at more groups. They have the ability to perch up on scale. So in my opinion, it seems relatively easy compared to the pigs. Pigs, again, are somewhere in the middle from a value per animal and ability to track that. And hence the cost to be able to do that going forward, I think will be probably our biggest limiter as we go forward. So bullish on sensors from my perspective. I think a camera can do a lot for us. We're only in those barns perhaps an hour to a couple hours a day, depending on whether it's a wean to finish barn or nursery or something along those lines. So monitoring when we're not there, being able to alert us where our important need is right away. And so from my perspective or our perspective, real-time pig weight estimation is kind of our number one. Behavior analysis and potentially feed intake number two. Health status, whether that's a camera, a cough monitor that was on the survey, or infrared to determine when those pigs are getting fevered or anything along that point. And then at the end of this, I think it's great that we have these monitors, but we need to make that into actionable items and be able to have somebody respond to those action items going forward. So I think that's our that's our need, and how to prioritize the individual's time that we're interacting with. I won't spill a lot of your thunder here, John, hopefully not. But I would say from a pig weight estimation, I remember in 2012 at Eurotier, there was a prize given away to OptiScan, which was a handheld scanner over a pig. So that long ago, that opportunity was there. There's a lot of different cameras out there now, and I would say that they're getting a lot better, and the companies are getting a lot better about predicting those animals. One, when they're given the information to feedback and do that, but two, going into a new barn and estimating those weights before you calibrate. So I think that's pretty cool, and I think there's some definitely opportunities there. Now, do I envision a camera in every pen? Definitely not right away. If you used one per quadrant or something like that, from my perspective, knowing that a barn weighs a certain average weight, going in there and picking out the heaviest 15 to 25% is relatively easy, rather knowing than one barn versus another is 10 pounds difference or not. But there's anywhere from the neighborhood of $1 to $5 per pig there in opportunity and marking those pigs more precisely as well. This is my viewpoint on those additional technologies, and I think one, we've got to utilize the information that we have better from our systems and intertwine that data or connect that data together. But thinking going from the barn to the pen to the individual, I think it's all possible. Where I see that is that interaction between availability and possibility relative to profitability. And I think those two, whenever those intersect, is when we'll get more traction going forward. It's no surprise or surprise that technology continues to get more and more economical as we go forward. And that's happening at an exponential rate from my perspective, but definitely some opportunities there. So from a parting message standpoint, I just want to leave you with a couple things here. Our industry needs to become more digital savvy, and I know that there's a distribution, but I think that's where our labor and personnel that we bring into are going to be digital savvy, and they're going to want some tools. So we need to be ahead and provide some of those tools to make their time most efficient. I think innovation and inspiration can come from anywhere, so letting that outside in, I think, is important. And the thing that I think that we can do is teach individuals about our industry, right? This is why things are the way that they are, the 5 whys. Why? I think about my 5-year-old back 10 years ago. That was very draining at times to answer all those whys, but I think it's valuable as we try to solve some of these challenges that we have and really harness what new individuals coming in do. Embrace that different thinking, and at the end of this, encourage innovation, whether you choose to implement it or now. Really, I think all of us, by encouraging the thinking differently, challenging that, our norms, I think, is something that will benefit us going forward, whether that be the next 5, 10, or 25 years. So don't know how I'm doing on time. We got time for questions. I'll entertain any questions. Yes.
Getting people outside of the industry over to innovation, but as someone who's about to enter the ag industry, how do we influence our producers that are in the industry that are doing the same thing for years and years and years that are pretty resistant to change? How can we influence them to risk their products, their finances on trying to
That's a great question. I'll repeat it for our virtual audience here. And let me see if I got your question right. For an individual coming into the industry that may not be knowledgeable about the industry completely, but have some individuals within the swine industry that are opposed to change or not open to change, maybe not. For me, this is my personal opinion. I think seeking to understand why things are the way that they are before bringing those thoughts or ideas forward, I think is the most important. So why, how did it get here? Why is it? Learn the industry. That conversation in that time with those individuals will help bring or allow some of those things to come forward. But I think seeking to understand, regardless of what we're talking about, is the most important. So I would say that, and Eric, sorry about this, but I learned more in the first 2 years coming out of school about the pig industry than I knew from my other time, either the 10 years that I spent in school or the time that I had spent in pigs. Some of those questions I had back then, I'm still asking today, just in a little different way. So I think that's a good question.
Because I've been told that cameras will not pick up the decreased body weight growth within the seed. Body. Is that true?
So let me see if I heard that right. So 2D cameras will not determine body weight, but it's an estimate of body weight.
Yeah, especially in the context of decreased growth, if you're having heat stress or disease.
Decreased growth and heat stress. So there's probably others in the crowd that could maybe answer that better than me. What I have seen is that whether it be 2 or 3D, there's actually some 2D cameras that actually do a pretty good job of predicting body weight. They definitely don't measure them. It's definitely a visual of that animal and not a weight. I think we've got to be careful how we interpret that. And I think the question was in sick pigs, does it necessarily do that or not? I would say that if we know how much feed's going in there and we have an estimate of the weight, that it will maybe not get me within a pound or 2 on every single pig, but I know what's happening in that barn. And if I know that sooner than later, whether it be water intake, feed intake, or the weight of the pig, how fast can I intervene there? And we still got to answer what comes first, right? Is it the fever? Is it the reduction in intake? Is it the weight? It's probably one of those latter things that come. But how do we understand that up front and then begin? So I'd say it's using all the information that we have. I've personally seen some cameras that do, the data that I showed was that 97, 98%, and that was out without providing data back to it to make it even better. So I think the more you refine this, the more you refine this for your system, the better it will be going forward. So, yes.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. I have a few questions, and one of them is, last month I was privileged to speak with some farmers that expressed their concerns about adopting innovative technology. And I just want to share with you one of the concerns that this said they are really interested in paying premium for old technology. They gave me the examples of old tractors, those ones made in 1975, that they are willing to pay more to obtain those ones, because if they obtain the one made in 2021, they automatically collect data while they are working on their field, and this data is sent to the cloud, and that they have issues with the ownership of the data that is collected while these machines are operational on their farms. So for that reason, they said they want to have technology that is operational on their farm, that doesn't collect their data, information on their activities, send it to tech companies that now take ownership of this data and use it even at times against them. So for this reason, some of them are not, it's not as if they are not innovative, but they have concerns about data collection and privacy.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I spent, quite a few years on the other side of the table, you might say, and definitely is a concern that needs to be overcome, and whether it's a local analysis that's set up or raw information that's set up, I think the data privacy is something that needs to be addressed, and not only privacy, but security as well. Right, I think that's going to be extremely important as we move forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your time.